The rain fell softly on the windows of the tall research building in New Seoul. Hye-yeon sat at her desk, watching the water drops slide down the glass. She was different from other scientists. While they looked at their computer screens and fancy machines, she liked to watch the rain with her own eyes. Hye-yeon worked as a weather scientist at the New Seoul Weather Research Center. She was 30 years old, with long black hair that she always kept in a neat braid. She wore simple clothes, usually black pants and comfortable sweaters, and carried a special notebook wherever she went. In this notebook, she wrote down everything strange she saw about the rain. Lately, the rain had been acting very strange indeed. Sometimes the drops would stop in midair, as if they were thinking about where to go. Other times, they would move sideways or even go up instead of down. Hye-yeon's coworkers said it was just the wind playing tricks, but she knew better. She had been watching the rain for 5 years now, and she had never seen anything like this. Today was different from other rainy days. The sky was darker than usual, and the air felt heavy with something more than just water. Hye-yeon pressed her hand against the cold window glass and looked up at the clouds. They were swirling in patterns she had never seen before, like someone was stirring them with a giant spoon. "Hye-yeon, are you watching the rain again?" asked Mr. Kim, her boss, as he walked past her desk. He was a kind old man who always wore bow ties and had worked at the research center for 30 years. "You should be looking at the weather data from last month." "But Mr. Kim," Hye-yeon said, pointing at the window, "look at how the raindrops are moving. They're going up." Mr. Kim adjusted his glasses and looked where she was pointing. A few raindrops were indeed floating upward, sparkling like tiny diamonds in the gray light. "Probably just a strong wind current," he said with a smile. "Don't let your imagination run away with you." But Hye-yeon couldn't let it go. After Mr. Kim left, she took out her special camera, one she had built herself. It could take pictures of raindrops up close, showing details that normal cameras missed. She opened her office window just a little bit, letting in the cool, damp air. The camera made soft clicking sounds as she took picture after picture of the unusual rain. Later that evening, when most people had gone home, Hye-yeon sat in the dark laboratory looking at the pictures on her computer. What she saw made her gasp. Inside each raindrop, there were tiny lights, not reflections, but actual glowing spots that moved around like fireflies in a glass jar. She zoomed in closer and closer. The computer screen showed something impossible. Tiny buildings inside the raindrops, with even tinier windows that glowed with warm light. She could see small shapes moving between these buildings, like people going about their daily lives, but so small they could fit on the tip of a needle. Hye-yeon's hands shook as she saved the pictures. She knew she had discovered something amazing, but she also knew she needed help. She needed someone who would believe her, someone who knew about things that seemed impossible. She remembered reading about a young scientist named Hye-won who worked in the quantum physics department on the floor above. People said he had strange ideas about parallel worlds and different dimensions. Maybe he would understand what she had found. Hye-yeon packed up her camera and the pictures she had taken. The rain was still falling outside, but now she looked at each drop differently. Were there tiny cities in all of them? Were there little people living their lives in that wet world above the ground? As she walked to the elevator, the lights in the building flickered. Thunder rolled across the sky, but it sounded different, almost like music playing very far away. Hye-yeon held her notebook closer to her chest and smiled. She had always loved fairy tales when she was little, stories about magical worlds and tiny people. Now it seemed those stories might not have been just make-believe after all. The elevator doors opened to the quantum physics floor. It was quieter up here, with dark hallways lit by blue lights. Hye-yeon walked past laboratories full of strange machines until she found the office she was looking for. The door was open, and inside, a young man was writing equations on a clear glass board. Tae-won was tall and thin, with round glasses that kept sliding down his nose as he wrote. His desk was covered with books about parallel universes and different dimensions. Paper cups of coffee were scattered everywhere, and his computer showed complicated diagrams that Heyun didn't understand. "Excuse me," Heyun said softly. "Dr. Taiwan, can I talk to you about something strange I found in the rain?" Taiwan turned around, pushing his glasses back up. "Strange how?" he asked, looking interested. Heyun took out her computer and showed him the pictures. As Taiwan looked at them, his eyes grew wide. This is amazing," he whispered. "How did you take these?" She explained about her special camera and the rain that moved the wrong way. Taiwan listened carefully, nodding and taking notes. Unlike others who might have laughed at her story, he seemed excited. "I've been working on a theory," he said, pulling out a thick notebook, "about worlds that exist inside other worlds, like Russian nesting dolls. But I never thought we'd find proof in raindrops." Together, they spent hours looking at Heyun's pictures and comparing them with Taiwan's research. The rain continued to fall outside, and sometimes they would stop to watch drops float past the window, knowing now that each one might contain an entire civilization. As midnight approached, they made a plan. Taiwan had been building a machine that could detect parallel dimensions. With Heyun's raindrop pictures and his equipment, they might be able to find a way to communicate with the tiny world they had discovered. "Meet me here tomorrow morning," Taiwan said as Heyun got ready to leave. "Bring your camera. I think we're about to make the biggest discovery in human history." Heyun walked home through the rain that night, holding an umbrella and looking up at the drops that fell around her. Some of them still moved upward, glowing softly in the darkness. She thought about all the tiny lives that might be happening inside those drops. People going to work, children playing, someone watching their own kind of rain fall in their own tiny sky. For the first time in her life, Heyun felt like she truly understood why she had always been so fascinated by the rain. It wasn't just water falling from the sky. It was a bridge between worlds, a connection to something magical and real at the same time. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the rain tap against her window, Heyun wrote in her notebook, "Today I discovered that fairy tales are real. They're just smaller than we thought they would be." Thunder rolled again, sounding more and more like distant music. Heyun closed her eyes and smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring more amazing discoveries. The rain kept falling, each drop carrying its own tiny world, its own stories, its own magic, waiting to be discovered by those who knew how to look closely enough. As she drifted off to sleep, Heyun thought she heard tiny voices in the rain, singing songs in a language she didn't understand. But that was a discovery for another day, and tomorrow would bring enough wonders of its own. The next morning came with more rain. Heyun woke up early and rushed to the research center, carrying her special camera and notebook. Her heart beat faster as she took the elevator to Taiwan's floor. She couldn't stop thinking about the tiny lights she had seen in the raindrops. Taiwan was already in his laboratory when she arrived. He had dark circles under his eyes, which told Heyun he hadn't slept much. His desk was now covered with strange equipment, glass tubes, small mirrors, and a machine that hummed softly. "I worked all night," Taiwan said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "I think I found a way to make the raindrops bigger without breaking them." He pointed to the machine on his desk. It looked like a microscope, but with many more parts attached to it. Heyun put down her camera and walked closer to look at the machine. "How does it work?" she asked. "It uses quantum fields to create a stable bubble around a raindrop." Taiwan explained in simple terms. "Think of it like blowing up a balloon, but very slowly and carefully so nothing inside gets hurt." They spent the morning setting up their equipment. Heyun used her special camera to find raindrops with the most lights inside them, while Taiwan adjusted his machine. Outside, the rain continued to fall, some drops still moving upward against gravity. Around noon, they caught their first special raindrop. It was bigger than the others and glowed with a soft blue light. Heyun carefully caught it in a small glass cup and brought it to Taiwan's machine. "Ready?" Taiwan asked. his finger hovering over a button. Hei-yun nodded, holding her breath. Ta-Wan pressed the button, and the machine began to hum louder. The raindrop floated up from the glass cup and hung in the air between two metal rings. Slowly, very slowly, it started to grow. At first, nothing seemed to change except the size. But as the drop got bigger, they could see more details inside. The tiny lights they had seen before became clearer. They were windows in small buildings, just as Hei-yun had thought. When the raindrop was about the size of a basketball, they saw something move inside. It wasn't just a light or a shadow. It was a person. A very small person with delicate wings, like the fairies in storybooks. "Oh my goodness," Hei-yun whispered. She leaned closer to look, her eyes wide with wonder. The fairy inside the raindrop looked back at them. She had long silver hair and wore clothes that seemed to be made from flower petals. She didn't look scared. Instead, she smiled and waved at them. Ta-Wan quickly adjusted some controls on his machine. "I'm going to try to make it possible for us to hear each other," he said. He turned a dial, and suddenly they could hear soft music coming from inside the raindrop. The same kind of music Hei-yun had thought she heard in the thunder. The fairy spoke, and her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Hello, giants of the world above," she said in perfect Korean. "We have been waiting for you to find us." Hei-yun and Ta-Wan looked at each other in surprise. The fairy could speak their language. "My name is Jia," the fairy continued. "I am the queen of the raindrop realm. We have watched your world for many years, learning your languages and ways. We knew that someday someone would look closely enough to see us." "But how is this possible?" Hei-yun asked. "How can you live inside raindrops?" Queen Jia smiled. "Our world exists in what you might call a different dimension. The raindrops are doorways between our worlds. When it rains in your world, it creates thousands of paths between our realms." As she spoke, more fairies appeared behind her. They were all different sizes and wore clothes in beautiful colors. Some had wings like butterflies, others like dragonflies. They moved through their water world as easily as fish swim in the sea. "Would you like to see our city?" Queen Jia asked. Hei-yun and Ta-Wan nodded eagerly. Queen Jia waved her hand, and suddenly the view inside the raindrop changed. They could see an entire city made of crystal and light. Buildings spiraled up like seashells, connected by bridges that looked like they were made from rainbow light. Gardens floated in the air, full of flowers that glowed like stars. "This is amazing," Ta-Wan said, taking notes as fast as he could. "Your technology must be incredibly advanced." "We have had many years to develop our science," Queen Jia explained. "We learned how to shape water and light to our needs, but we have also watched your world with great interest. Your way of building and growing things is very different from ours." As they talked, Hei-yun noticed something interesting. When Queen Jia moved closer to the edge of the raindrop, she grew bigger. When she moved toward the center, she became smaller again. It was as if size itself worked differently in their world. "Size is not fixed in our dimension," Queen Jia said, noticing Hei-yun's observation. "What appears small to you can be vast to us, and what seems huge to you might be tiny in our perspective. That's why we can live comfortably in what you see as raindrops." The morning turned into afternoon as they learned more about each other's worlds. Queen Jia explained that her people had always known about the giants who lived in the world above. They had watched humans build cities, create machines, and look up at the rain. They had waited patiently for humans to develop the right kind of technology to see them. "But why do some raindrops fall up instead of down?" Hei-yun asked, remembering what had first caught her attention. Queen Jaya's eyes twinkled. "Those are our explorers, returning home. We can control the direction of the water drops that contain our cities. Sometimes we go up to get a better view of your world." As they talked, more scientists from the research center gathered around Ta-Wan's laboratory. Word had spread quickly that something extraordinary was happening. Mr. Kim, Hei-yun's boss, stood in the doorway with his mouth open in surprise. "This changes everything we know about weather," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "All these years, we thought we were just studying water and air, but we were really looking at doorways to another world." Queen Jia spoke to all of them now. "We would like to share our knowledge with you," she said. "We have learned much about the patterns of weather and the ways of water. Perhaps together, we can help both our worlds understand each other better." The fairy queen waved her hand again, and small lights began to dance around the inside of the raindrop. It formed pictures in the air, diagrams of weather patterns, maps of wind currents, and designs for machines that could help predict storms. "This is just the beginning," Queen Jada said. "There is so much more we can show you." As the day went on, more raindrops were carefully caught and expanded using Taiwan's machine. Each one contained different parts of the fairy city, different citizens going about their daily lives. Some drops held schools where young fairies learned to fly. Others had gardens where they grew their glowing flowers. Heiyun sat at her desk, writing everything down in her notebook. She had started the day as a scientist who studied rain, and now she was helping to build a bridge between two worlds. She looked out the window at the falling rain and smiled, knowing that each drop might hold new friends and new wonders. That evening, as the sun set behind the rainy clouds, Queen Jia made an important announcement. "Tomorrow," she said, "if you are willing, we would like to show you how to visit our world. There is a way for humans to become small enough to enter a raindrop, just for a little while. Would you like to learn?" Heiyun and Taiwan looked at each other with excitement. They had discovered a new world in the morning, and now they might get to visit it. As they prepared to go home for the night, the rain outside seemed to sing with joy, celebrating the new friendship between the giants of the world above and the fairies of the raindrop realm. The next morning brought even more rain to New Seoul. Heiyun arrived at the research center before sunrise, her heart racing with excitement. Today, she and Taiwan would try to visit the fairy world inside the raindrops. Queen Jaya was already waiting for them in the expanded raindrop from yesterday. She wore a crown made of tiny water crystals that sparkled like diamonds. Next to her stood a fairy scientist named Dong Hyuk, who had silver wings and carried what looked like a wand made of glass. "Good morning, friends from the world above," Queen Jia said warmly. "Are you ready for your journey?" Heiyun and Taiwan nodded eagerly. They had spent all night preparing for this moment. They wore special waterproof clothes that Taiwan had designed, and each carried a small bag with notebooks and cameras. "Before we begin," Dong Hyuk said, his voice gentle like a summer breeze, "I must explain how the shrinking process works. We will use our water magic to change your size temporarily. It will feel like diving into a warm pool. You will be able to breathe normally, and the effect will last for exactly 6 hours." Mr. Kim and other scientists gathered around to watch. Some held cameras to record this historic moment. Heiyun felt nervous but excited. She had always dreamed of magical adventures, but she never thought she would actually live one. Dong Hyuk raised his glass wand. "Please stand still," he said. "The transformation will begin now." A soft blue light surrounded Heiyun and Taiwan. Heiyun felt warm all over, like she was standing in gentle sunlight. The world around her began to grow bigger, or rather, she was growing smaller. The floor seemed to move farther away, and the raindrop that held the fairy city grew enormous. When the transformation finished, Heiyun and Taiwan were the same size as the fairies. They stood on what felt like solid ground, even though they were actually standing on the surface of Taiwan's desk. The expanded raindrop now looked like a giant crystal gate. "Welcome to our side of things," Queen Jaya said, extending her hand. "Shall we enter the city?" Walking into the raindrop felt like stepping through a curtain of warm water, but they didn't get wet. Inside, the air was clean and fresh, with a slight smell of flowers. Heiyun could hear soft music playing from somewhere far away. The fairy city was even more beautiful up close. The buildings were made of something that looked like glass but was stronger. They curved and spiraled up into the watery sky, connected by bridges that seemed to be made of solid rainbow light. Gardens floated in the air, full of glowing flowers and tiny trees with crystal leaves. "This is Waterlight City," Queen Gia explained as they walked. "It is one of many cities in our realm. Each raindrop can hold an entire city or forest or ocean. Space works differently here. What looks tiny from the outside can be vast within." Fairy children played in the streets, their wings shimmering with different colors. They stopped to wave at the visitors, curious about these wingless giants who had become small. Some of them giggled and flew in circles around Heiyun and Tadwan. "Would you like to try flying?" Donghook asked. He held up 2 necklaces made of crystal drops. "These will give you temporary wings. All visitors get to try them." Heiyun put on her necklace and immediately felt something light and delicate spread from her shoulders. She turned her head and saw beautiful butterfly wings, transparent like morning dew, but strong enough to lift her. Taiwan's wings looked more like a dragonfly's, shimmering with green and blue. Learning to fly was easier than Heiyun expected. It felt natural, like swimming in air. Soon, they were soaring through the city with Queen Jia and Donghyuk, seeing everything from above. The city sparkled below them like a jewel caught in sunlight. They flew past schools where young fairies learned magic, workshops where artisans crafted things from light and water, and laboratories where fairy scientists studied both their world and the world above. Everything was peaceful and organized, but also filled with joy and wonder. "How do you create all of this?" Taiwan asked as they landed in a floating garden. He was trying to write notes while keeping his balance on a path made of rainbow light. "We use what you might call water magic," Donghyuk explained. "But it's really a very advanced science. We learned how to reshape water molecules and bend light to our will. Every raindrop is like a tiny universe that we can mold and shape." They spent hours exploring the city. Heiyun learned that the fairies had their own kind of technology, but it worked in harmony with nature. They could control weather patterns, purify water, and even heal sick plants and animals with their knowledge of water science. In one laboratory, fairy scientists showed them how they studied the world above. They had tiny devices that could ride along in raindrops, collecting information about the giant world. These devices helped them learn human languages and understand human technology. "We've watched your world grow and change," Queen Jia said as they walked through a museum filled with images of human history. "We saw you build your cities, create your machines, and reach for the stars. We knew that someday you would develop the ability to see us, and then we could finally meet as friends." Heiyun noticed that many fairy children carried books that looked like human fairy tales. "Do you read stories about us?" she asked a small group of fairy students who were following them around. One of the fairy children, a little girl with rose petal wings, held up her book. "We read about the friendly giants who live in the world above," she said shyly. "Now we know the stories are true." As the day went on, Heiyun and Taiwan learned more about how the two worlds were connected. The fairies explained that their realm helped keep Earth's water cycle in balance. When they guided raindrops upward, they were actually helping to clean and purify the water. "Our worlds need each other," Donghyuk said as they watched fairy workers guide rain clouds into position above New Seoul. "The water cycle connects us all. Every raindrop that falls is a message of friendship between our peoples." Near the end of their visit, Queen Jia took them to the highest tower in Waterlight City. From there, they could see other raindrops in the distance, each containing its own fairy city or forest. The view was like looking at a galaxy made of water drops, each one glowing with its own inner light. "We want to work together with humans," Queen Jia said. "There is so much we can learn from each other. Your world faces challenges with climate and water pollution. We can help you solve these problems, and perhaps you can help us explore new ways to expand our understanding of the universe." As their 6 hours drew to a close, Heiyun and Taiwan prepared to return to their normal size. They had filled their notebooks with drawings and descriptions of everything they had seen. But more importantly, they had filled their hearts with the wonder of this new friendship between worlds. "Remember," Queen Jita said as they said goodbye, "whenever it rains, look up. Every drop carries a piece of our world, a message of hope, and a reminder that magic is real. It's just smaller than you thought it would be." The transformation back to their normal size felt like floating up from the bottom of a warm pool. When it was complete, Hei-yun and Tai-wan stood once again at their full height, looking at the expanded raindrop that held Waterlight City. That evening, as they shared their discoveries with the other scientists, the rain outside seemed to dance with joy. Each drop that fell or floated upward now carried a special meaning, a reminder that the world was full of more wonder than anyone had imagined. 1 month had passed since Hao-yun and Tai-wan first visited the fairy world inside the raindrops. The research center had changed a lot since then. The top floor now had a special room called the Rainbow Bridge Room, where expanded raindrops hung in the air like crystal balls. Each raindrop was a window to a different fairy city. Hei-yun sat at her new desk in the Rainbow Bridge Room, writing in her notebook. She had filled 3 notebooks already with everything she had learned about the fairy world. Today was going to be special. It was the first day of the new friendship program between humans and fairies. Queen Jia appeared in the largest raindrop, wearing her crystal crown. Next to her stood Dong-hyuk, who had become good friends with Tai-wan. They often worked together, mixing human science with fairy magic to solve problems. "Good morning, Hei-yun," Queen Jia said with a smile. "Are the children ready?" Hei-yun looked at the clock on the wall. "They'll be here in 10 minutes. This is the first school group to visit us." She felt excited but also a little nervous. 20 children from a local elementary school were coming to learn about the fairy world. Tai-wan rushed into the room, carrying a box of the special necklaces that could give humans temporary wings. "I made them smaller to fit the children," he said, putting the box on a table. "And I added safety features so they can't fly too high." The room had been prepared carefully for the visit. There were comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, each with a small desk for taking notes. The walls were painted with pictures of Waterlight City and other fairy places. Even the lights had been changed to look like the soft glow of the fairy realm. At exactly 9 o'clock, the children arrived. They were between 8 and 10 years old, wearing their school uniforms and carrying notebooks. Their eyes grew wide when they saw the floating raindrops and the fairies inside them. "Welcome, young friends," Queen Jia said. Her voice was gentle and kind. "Today you will learn about our world, and some of you will even get to visit it." The children sat down, trying to be quiet but unable to hide their excitement. Their teacher, Ms. Lee, stood at the back of the room, smiling as she watched them. She had been one of the first teachers to sign up for the friendship program. Hei-yun began the lesson by showing them how the special camera worked. She let each child look through it to see the tiny lights in normal raindrops. "Each light you see," she explained, "might be a window in a fairy house or a lamp in a fairy street." Dong-hyuk demonstrated how fairy scientists controlled the weather. He created a small rain cloud in the air above the children's heads. The cloud sprinkled soft, warm rain that sparkled with rainbow colors. The children laughed and tried to catch the drops in their hands. "In our world," Dong-hyuk explained, "we learn to work with nature instead of trying to control it. Every raindrop is precious. Every storm has a purpose. We help keep the water of your world clean and healthy." After the demonstration, it was time for the most exciting part. 5 children had been chosen by lottery to visit the fairy world. They would be the first children from the world above to enter Waterlight City. Hei-yun helped the chosen children put on their special necklaces. She had done this journey many times now, but she still felt excited every time. "Remember," she told them, "the magic will last for 2 hours. Stay close to your fairy guide. And don't forget to write down everything you see." The shrinking process was gentler for children than for adults. The 5 chosen ones seemed to shimmer for a moment, then became small enough to enter the raindrop. Their classmates watched in amazement as their friends flew into the fairy world, their new wings sparkling in the light. While those children explored Waterlight City, Queen Gia taught the others about fairy history and culture. She showed them how fairy children their age lived, what they learned in school, and what games they played. "Our children love to hear stories about your world," Queen Gia said. "They think it's amazing that you can grow so tall and build such big things. Now they can share their stories with you too." In Waterlight City, the visiting children were having wonderful adventures. They flew through crystal gardens, visited a fairy school, and even helped make rainbow bridges between buildings. Their fairy guides showed them how to plant glowing flowers and how to sing songs that made water dance in the air. Back in the Rainbow Bridge room, the remaining children worked on special projects. They drew pictures of what they imagined fairy homes looked like, wrote stories about adventures in the raindrop world, and learned simple fairy songs. Taiwan showed them how the fairy technology worked. He explained how the raindrops could move upward, how the fairies could change their size, and how the 2 worlds stayed connected through the water cycle. He used simple words and lots of pictures to help them understand. "Science and magic are really the same thing," he told them. "They're just different ways of understanding how the world works. The fairies have taught us that the most magical things often have simple explanations, and the simplest things can be full of magic." When the 2 hours were up, the visiting children returned from Waterlight City. They were bubbling with excitement, talking all at once about what they had seen. Each of them had made friends with fairy children their own age, and they had promised to write letters to each other. "But how can we send letters to the fairy world?" one boy asked. Hei-yun smiled and showed them a special mailbox in the corner of the room. "When you put a letter in here," she explained, "it gets shrunk down small enough to fit in a raindrop. The fairies collect these raindrops and deliver the letters to their friends." As the school day came to an end, each child received a special gift, a tiny crystal pendant that glowed when it rained. "These will help you remember that magic is real," Queen Gia said. "Whenever it rains, look for us in the drops. We'll be looking for you too." The children left the research center changed by their experience. They had learned that the world was bigger and more wonderful than they had imagined. They had seen that friendship could cross any boundary, even between different worlds. That evening, Hei-yun stood by the window in the Rainbow Bridge room, watching the rain fall. Some drops fell down, some floated up, and all of them sparkled with possibility. She thought about how much had changed since she first noticed the strange rain 1 month ago. "We've started something wonderful," Taiwan said, standing next to her. "These children will grow up knowing that magic and science can work together. They'll remember that wonderful things can come in the smallest packages." Queen Gia appeared in the nearest raindrop. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Every raindrop is a door between our worlds, and every door opens both ways. The children of both worlds will grow up together now, learning from each other, sharing their stories and dreams." As night fell over New Seoul, the rain continued to dance in the air. In thousands of raindrops, 2 worlds shared their magic, their knowledge, and their friendship. And in each drop that fell or rose, there was a reminder that the most amazing discoveries often come when we look closely at the simplest things.